Hey, welcome to the latest episode of The Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott. I've got Beck with me today, who used to be a copper, now works in victim support. Amazing story that you're going to hear about. Um, as as usual, if you have any questions or stuff, because this is now pre-recorded rather than live, reach out to me. My number is 07506 319 745 or noel@noelmcdermott.net. If you've got questions for Beck, I'll pass them on to her. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them, and we'll put her sort of any details around her book and stuff like that on the show as well, so that because she just produced a book very courageously, I have to say, about her experience. Without further ado, hi Beck, how you doing?
Hi, Noel. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
It's great. And thanks for your flexibility. People won't know this, but we were going to do it the other day. And my Wi-Fi crashed literally 2 minutes before we were supposed to start recording it. So I've had a poor old BT engineer outside overnight fixing things. Bless him. He's a nice bloke, actually. So that's all sorted now. So thanks for your flexibility. I know you've got to rush off to take your kids. It's Halloween today, and you've got to go
Yeah.
frighten them. That sort of stuff.
Easily done.
Great, good. That's the job of a mum, to frighten her kids. So I'll let you get off to that. So welcome to the show, and thanks, really, thank you for being here. Particularly, it's really important, I think, that professionals, particularly in services like the police, open up and talk about their experiences around mental ill health and recovery. There's a lot of evidence now that the more people do discuss it, the more likely it is that somebody's going to spot a problem at the early stages of an illness, get help at that point, and getting help at the early stages are better outcomes, and even, God forbid, be preventative in their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Good Lord, what a thought that is. Rather than wait to get run over, avoid getting run over.
Yeah.
That's why this is really important, and people like yourself, Beck, are trailblazers. Where are you based at the moment?
Lancashire. So I live East Lancashire near Clitheroe.
Is that where you grew up?
No, I grew up in near Wigan, Parbold, a little village. So I grew
Okay,
up there all my life, and then I moved to Blackpool for a while when I was first posted in the police.
great. So what was that like? You were sort of in a working class, small community,
Yeah,
parent.
working class, small community. My dad passed away 9 years ago, but prior to that, he worked for the local paper, the Wigan Reporter. My
Yeah,
mum was a teacher, and I've got an elder sister.
right. And a
Yeah,
sort of fairly close community, I imagine.
yeah. It's a nice little village. Yeah, all my friends and my family still live there at that place.
I tried to, I'm a city boy. I tried to live in the country once. I would think of that as the country to me.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I live even more in the country now, where I
Do
live now.
you?
I love it. I love the country life.
Great, great. What do you like about it?
Just the walking, really. We've got a lot of lovely countryside around here, a lot of walking,
Absolutely.
going out on my bike. Yeah, it's ideal for me.
Nice sort of healthy lifestyle. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I want to move to a small town, and I have to say, it wasn't for me. I went a bit sort of strange, sort of.
Yeah, I think yeah. If you're not used to it, I think it's a different way of life, isn't it?
Well, it's also because I live in London and people are friendly down here. You just start to get a little bit suspicious of them.
Yeah. They're
Do you
not
know what I
like
mean?
the Northerners.
No, not at all. But I have to say, I'm now that friendly bloke who you
Yeah.
don't want to sit next to on the bus. I'm telling you. Like I'm talking to everybody these days. I just like
Bit like me.
it's not right in London. Do you know what I mean? But I actually come from the Midlands, so I'm more
All right, okay.
culturally brought up in that. So
Yeah.
I'm much more used to it. But I came to London and I became encultured in London. But I think the Midlander in me is breaking out in my old age. So
Good.
okay, I'm going around being friendly to people and smiling, which people in London are going, "What? What's wrong with
Yeah.
you?"
What's wrong with him?
So essentially, you had a pretty stable childhood, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
loving parents, worked hard,
yeah.
disciplined. Close community, no major traumas or problems or anything like that.
No, really happy upbringing, really. Yeah, just a normal, whatever normal is, happy upbringing, yeah.
And also, so quite healthy by the sounds of it, you know, out in the country, going out and walks, I presume, as a family. That's one of the things that you did. You used
Yeah.
resources. And what was school like for you?
Yeah, school was good. Yeah, I went to school. Then I went on to college and did health and social care.
Yeah.
I always knew from the age of 5 that I wanted to be in the police. That
Did you?
was all, yeah, all I ever wanted to do.
Right.
So I went to college and I went to university, did a degree in psychology and criminology.
Yeah.
And then I applied for the police. And when I applied for it, I went off traveling around Canada for 6 months. And then it was whilst I was in Canada that I heard that I got through the process in the
Brilliant.
police.
That's amazing. What was it that attracted you to being in the police then from that age?
I think I'd always had it in me without sounding kind of cheesy. I just always liked helping people.
Right.
Yeah, just making a bit of a difference, really.
It's interesting because it's sort of, again, the way the police get presented often, this type of voice, this type side of police officers are not often discussed because, you know, you see these programs on TV, you know, coppers in fast cars and running
Yeah,
around and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, that's part of the job. But a lot of the job is also because you're looking out for vulnerable people,
yeah, definitely.
taking care of vulnerable people, making sure that people are okay. And you know, I mean, actually, I thought about joining the police a lot when I was,
Yeah.
yeah, I was really into it. It was that or the army.
Mhm.
And I didn't in the end, and partly because of my own sort of cultural upbringing, particularly the army, because I come from an Irish background and it was all complicated when I was growing up and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely, I was motivated to join the helping professions, and in my mind, the police were one of the helping professions, which is,
yeah.
and you have the same sort of thing. But do you know why in particular it was the police? What was it what was the sort of image you had in your head, do you think?
Think it was just probably mainly the helping people,
Right.
but I think the variety of work. I mean, it was hard to understand at 5 that, but as I grew up and the years went on, and I'd see things on TV, and yeah, I think it was just that really that attracted me to it. The variety of work, no
Right.
day was the same, and
So you went to Canada, you having a holiday, you heard you've got your dream job, um,
yeah,
and then you came back to the UK and I guess you started your training. How long is training now in the UK
it
or how
was
long?
15 weeks back then when I
Yeah.
joined. So I joined in 2000. It's a lot different now, I think. So I went off to training school for 15 weeks.
Was that
Uh,
in Hendon? That's the only one I know
it was
of.
called Bruges near Warrington.
Okay, right,
It's shut
right,
down now. And then you would sorry, you got your first posting after that. So I got Blackpool, sunny Blackpool,
right.
which was a mad place to start your career because I was only 22 at this age. So I was
So a lot of
like,
drinking, not on your part, I'm sure there was some, but
yeah,
mostly you were
oh,
dealing with those
maybe.
types of things.
Yeah, yeah. So very, very busy place to start off as a 999 response officer. So it was basically one of those places you either sink or swim.
Right,
But I loved it. I loved it from the start. I mean, don't get me wrong. At being 22, I hadn't really, although I'd had life experience, I'd never experienced anything like I did as soon as I was thrown into that. It was a
no,
very
because
busy.
that's right, because you're going to be facing some of the more difficult sides of life
Yeah,
that people are going through. No, I mean, I guess some of it is pretty straightforward and mundane. Somebody's a bit too drunk and you manage them and you get them home and stuff like that, right? But you
yeah,
could also be dealing with some quite frightening and difficult things, I would imagine.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of domestics, and very early on in my career, I'd say I'd only been in a few months. I was first on the scene to an horrific murder of a young
Right.
lad. And I had to give CPR and he died on me. And I think that messed my head up for a while.
Yeah.
I was offered counselling for it, but I think when you join, and back then especially, although welfare was about, I think you felt that you had to have that stiff upper lip, and you're a police officer, you have to get on with it. You can't show weakness. So I didn't really carry through with any counselling because I thought I was all right. But I think it's only as the months and the years go on that you store these things in your head and think little triggers can set it off.
I think that's right. And I was going to sort of pick up on that because I think it is, again, I mean, I think my profession has done us a disservice in many ways, because people still think that, you know, therapy and counselling is about having to go backwards in time to your childhood and work out your relationship to your mum and dad. And it's just not like that these days. I mean, if you want to do that, if you want to waste your time doing that, go for it, you know, but there's not much that's going to help you there. And mostly counselling and therapy around this stuff now is about helping you analyze the impact of something on yourself, and then give you better tools to manage the distressing responses that we have. And it's also, I think, that thing as well, that the early signs of distress may be quite subtle.
Yeah, definitely.
And,
No, I was going to say that I thought I was all right after that job, and it was probably only weeks, months down the line, I'd start having nightmares, flashbacks in my sleep. Little things could be triggers. I'd just be driving along, not even thinking about it, and it just pop in my head. It's bizarre.
So those are called intrusive thoughts and recurring memories. So those are sort of some of the signs, particularly the disturbed sleep is something people don't know, but often the sort of nightmares and recollections while we're sleeping is our brain attempting to process information and failing.
Right, okay.
So what happens is when we sleep, so that people maybe don't understand this, but when we sleep, the experience of the day is shifted from right to left hemisphere in the brain during what's called REM sleep and rapid eye movement sleep, dreaming. And it's literally information being shifted from left to right. And when the brain does that, it categorizes the information and stores it.
Okay.
So that's how it does it. A nightmare, what happens is, because the event is too distressing, it brings up sort of stress hormones in the body. It interrupts the REM sleep so that that experience can't be categorized. Essentially can't be forgotten.
Yeah, makes sense.
It can't be stored in the sort of back brain, in the memory stack, in long-term memory, because it interrupts that processing. And as you probably, I don't know if you've done now, sort of people won't know this, but there's a form of trauma therapy called eye movement desensitization.
Yeah, I've tried that actually.
And it literally, the therapist gets you to talk about something and says, follow me finger or tap yourself. And it's just moving information from left to right hemisphere of the brain so that your brain can store it. But it's prototypical, that stuff. So the intrusive thinking, the triggers from seemingly unrelated events, and the nightmares are all classic early signs that you're trying to process distressing events.
Okay.
And if they go on for more than a couple of weeks, then you should really know that you are failing to process those distressing events. And do you know the term first responder? You know the term. So first responders is a term that came from America, but it refers to police, ambulance, paramedics, and any other service that are frontline emergency services. And so you could include other services in that. The air sea rescue from the RAF, for example, would be a first responder. Prince William, I think, was one of those, wasn't he? And he talked about his trauma. Picking up bodies in the sea and stuff like that. And so I remember listening to him talking to a conference about it. So first responders have some of the highest rates of PTSD.
Which is understandable, isn't it?
And higher even than armed services. Isn't that strange?
Yeah, it is.
That's really strange. And the reason is often because in the armed forces, for example, they know that you're in danger, so they give you the tools and resources and they force you to use them.
All right,
So you don't have a choice. Your commanding officer says, right, you're going to see the psychiatrist, right, you're going to talk about this, because they need you back on the front line. They can't have you leaving, they invest a lot of money. but our first response services haven't quite got there yet. And in particular, it's a significant problem in the London Fire Brigade and fire services.
Oh, is it?
It's an overly macho approach.
Yeah.
Which is really problematic, which is that sort of stuff you were saying about stiff upper lip, that canteen culture. You just got to get on with it. You got to be tough.
Yeah.
And you end up. So anyway, that was me segueing off. But I think if people are listening and they're identifying this, particularly if you're first responder, you should be really, really thoughtful about this stuff and don't brush it off.
No, definitely.
Whatever you do. So you started having these nightmares and stuff like that. Did you think of mentioning it to anybody, or?
Yeah, I went through a couple of counselling sessions
Right.
eventually. But for me, I was a bit cynical of it all back then. Don't know whether it was an age thing, never done it before. I've never had issues like that before. So yeah, I paid it lip service. I went and then boxed it off, thinking I'd boxed it off. And to a certain point on a daily basis, I was all right.
Yeah.
I think it was only kind of as the years went on and I went to similar jobs, I'd have flashbacks from that job.
Right. So this is your first posting in Blackpool.
Yeah.
You see this horrific murder, you tough it out, you get on with it. What was the next thing that happened in terms of
so I stayed on 999 response for another 5 years. I dealt with other horrific jobs, really bad suicides in Blackpool that I was first on scene to. Again, that kind of messed with my head a bit. And then I went on to the public protection unit at Blackpool. So that was dealing with vulnerable people, the sex offenders register.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of surveillance work on that. And it was during that time that I was on there that I obviously my mental health started to decline. Not through the job specifically. I had a couple of personal issues in my life. Breakdown of a relationship and the death of my nana, who I was really close to. It was sudden. So I had kind of that all in the space of a couple of months. I'd never suffered depression or anything like that. I'd always been the joker on the team where I worked. I'd always been the social animal, organising everything, happy-go-lucky Beck. And I started to kind of decline a bit. My work started to get affected and I couldn't make sense of it even then. I felt a bit down. Guilt about certain things. Eventually went to my GP and they put me on some antidepressants. And again, I'm not depressed. I don't need antidepressants. I can get through this, but I eventually took them.
Yeah.
They didn't really work. So I went back to the GP. They put me on some others. And long story short, before I knew it, they were weaning me off some, putting me on some others. And I was probably on about 4 or 5 different ones, kind of overlapping. To the point where a certain one, I woke up one day and I started having suicidal thoughts. Again, something that I never ever contemplated would happen to me. And
do you remember the meds that you were on?
No, I know I was on olanzapine and stuff like that eventually, antipsychotic drugs.
Yeah.
When it got worse, but
was that from your GP? That wasn't from your GP, was it?
No.
That must have been much later on from a psychiatrist.
Yeah, it was a regular antidepressant though that gave me the suicidal thoughts, because you read them, don't you?
They do.
Yeah. And you read them. You read the leaflet sometimes, and it said so many can experience these, and you think, oh, it won't happen to me. It'll be fine. But yeah, I woke up that morning, and I just thought I need to find the nearest tree and to hang myself. And it was for me to feel like that. I mean, I've been to jobs like that and seen the devastating effects it can have on families. And I thought, why am I thinking this? And before I knew it, I was starting to act this out. I was starting to go out in the middle of the night with a cord, and I'd always tell people, because I didn't want to die in the slightest. And again, it's hard to explain. I didn't want to die, but I couldn't cope with not being me anymore. And this constant anxiety and this constant not knowing what was happening to me. I just wanted some peace and for it to end, but not to go, because I wouldn't want to leave this earth.
That's really common, Beck. I mean, people don't talk about they don't want their life to end. They just want the pain to stop.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I felt.
And then we have these irrational thoughts. Just while we're talking about it, I want to talk to people listening. If you're having thoughts like this, then it's really important that you don't act upon them. What Beck was experiencing is what we call suicidal ideation. It can happen because of a response to historic trauma, such as Beck's. It can also happen because the medication we're on to help us deal with anxiety and depression can worsen symptoms for a short period of time. And so it's really important, if you're experiencing that the first thing you do is you tell your GP, you tell people about it. If you're feeling it now while you're listening to this and you're worried about those thoughts and feelings, call the Samaritans. We'll put the number up for you, but they're very easy to find. They're a brilliant organization and they're there to help you. You can just talk through things, folks. The basic line is suicidal ideation is a stage that can be managed very successfully when you work with somebody who knows what they're talking about. So don't make a permanent mistake out of what is a temporary emotional experience. And Beck's here, so you know it's temporary. She got through it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Her story gets more difficult, I'm promising you, but she got through it.
I did, yeah.
She is now. And
Yeah.
look at the smile on her face, folks. So if you're having these distressing thoughts and feelings, know that you can get through it, you can get the help. And that's why Beck is here, to describe to you her story, but also how she came through it. All right. So don't act on those feelings. So you had suicidal ideation, as we would call it, with a plan and intention. That's quite a high level of risk.
Yeah.
Were you talking to anybody about that, Beck, or were you just too embarrassed and frightened of it?
I think I was mixture of all that really. I was frightened, but obviously people knew about it because I would text people and they'd come and find me.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
I'm
because
glad.
I wanted help. When I first set out doing it, I thought, yeah, I need all this to end. But then I'd text someone because it scared me because I didn't want to go through with anything.
Absolutely. Did you have kids at that point?
No,
Right.
no.
So but you had a good social network by the sounds of it, a reasonable social network?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and I had a lot of good friends, and it was down to those friends and my family, especially, that got me through everything, really. Although I pushed them all away, again, I think I was ashamed of what I was going through. I wasn't the Beck anymore that they once
Yeah.
knew, and I kind of pushed everyone away. But luckily, the friends were that good; they stood by me regardless.
And and again, it's a thing that people don't know, but this sense of you're a burden on other people, that you're a failure, is a classic symptom of depression. It
Yeah, and that's what I
absolutely,
felt like.
it's the defining, particularly for a professional like yourself and a helper, a professional.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand that, like, your personality is about helping other people, not helping yourself,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And
Yeah, I
so,
felt like I'd failed.
yeah, exactly. No, I totally get it. And that, again, folks, when you're listening to this, if you have those feelings, they are just feelings, they're not facts, and they are symptoms of an illness that you've got, and it's an illness that can be treated. All right. With the right help, you'll get through it. So again, Beck, thank you so much for sharing that. Were you still in the police at this point while you were going through
Yeah.
this experience?
Yeah.
Did your colleagues know? Did your boss know?
Yeah, my work totally declined on the unit that I was on. I was always a really hard worker, last to stay at work, and it started to decline. I'd started in ringing in work, sick, just wanting to shut myself away
Yeah.
where I lived. Yeah, and then eventually I just became completely withdrawn. I wouldn't talk to anyone. Yeah, I was just on edge permanently, and everyone noticed, to the point eventually I had to go off work. And I think it was from then, because I didn't have a purpose to get up for anymore. My mental health just declined rapidly, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, classic thing that happens. So, like, it's really interesting that one of the most effective treatments for anxiety and depression is to get people back to work.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
don't take time off, don't go into a hospital ward, get back on the horse, get back on with life, even though it's a struggle. It's really important. So you were given time off. Were you given anything else? I mean, in terms of support or?
No, I wasn't given any counselling. That was just it. The GP, all they threw at me really was tablets,
Yeah,
and yeah, I wasn't given any kind of therapy to go to or
yeah.
anything like that.
That's
Um,
unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think if I'd been given, maybe thinking back now, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But maybe grief counselling or something like that, because
Yeah,
ultimately I'd experienced two losses, major losses in my life
yeah,
suddenly.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe talking therapy might have made a difference. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, hopefully these days it would be different if people go and see the GP, because now the NICE guidelines, these are the clinical guidelines, say people should be offered talking therapies first. They may be given medication alongside it if the symptoms are very, very severe, but
Yeah.
really should be. And there's a program called IAPT, which is now called um, psychological therapies, I think. But anyway, if you Google IAPT, followed by the name of the area where you live, like I live in Hackney, so if I was to Google IAPT space Hackney, it would take me to an NHS free service, which is a counselling service. You self-refer, they'll assess you over the phone, they'll get you into evidence-based therapies. You're doing some CBT now, so CBT, mindfulness-based CBT, and they have 3 tiers of support. So that should be the first point of call for people now. And the evidence is that those evidence-based therapies are more effective than medication.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
They're quicker and more effective and longer
yeah,
lasting because you change
yeah,
your lifestyle, and that's what we're going to get to with you eventually. But we're going to continue going into the failures to help you, if that's okay.
yeah. No, that's fine.
Like just as a warning to people of what not to have happen to you. So
Yeah,
the first thing is not loads of drugs thrown at you by somebody who isn't a specialist in mental health. Go and
yeah,
get proper mental health support via your GP, or self-refer yourself into IAP, like I say.
yeah.
So what's the next step then in terms of you're at home, you're alone, you're suicidal?
Yeah, carried on with that kind of behavior, really, trying to self-harm, all superficial kind of stuff on my wrist. I've got no marks now or anything. It was
Yeah,
very superficial. Again, was that I think that was just a bit of stress relief to take my mind off it for that split second.
yeah, yeah.
And then
That's what the pain does. It's distracting, isn't it? From the
yeah,
internal pain. You have physical pain. You can ground yourself
yeah,
in the external and the real, right? Yeah.
yeah. And then one particular day, I woke up and it was like I describe it in my book that I've done. It's like someone had hit me over the head with a sledgehammer, and it was I just had what I know now to be. I didn't know that was happening at the time, but a massive psychotic episode
Right.
where I was just basically rolling around on the floor. It's quite vague now, but I can remember bits. I was rolling around on the floor, screaming,
Yeah.
help me," to the point where the crisis team were at my house at this point. They didn't come to see me often, but they were there at this point. And the police were called. Obviously, you can't be sectioned in your own home, but the police were called, and I was
That's not
arrested for.
obvious to most people.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah.
Section
But
136 of the Mental Health Act allows the police to take people to a place of safety, but only
yeah,
if they're in a public space.
yeah,
Otherwise,
yeah,
you need a court order to get into somebody's home.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was arrested for breach of the peace and taken to my by my own colleagues, which was horrific.
Really
Totally,
strange.
yeah. Oh, to come into my own home. My mum was there as well, because my mum had stayed the night before because she got really worried about my behaviour.
Yeah.
And to be carted off by 3 police officers in
Yeah.
cuffs was the most degrading, scariest, humiliating time of my life.
Yeah.
I was thrown in the back of a van, taken to my nearest police station, and just shoved in a cell.
Yeah.
And the fear, I can't even describe it. It was horrendous how I felt. I stayed in there for a while, not having a clue what was going to happen to me. At this point, it still hadn't clicked with me that I was going to be taken to a psychiatric unit. And then eventually, after hours of being in the cell, I was escorted to Lancaster Psychiatric Unit, which is now
So
shut
while you
down.
were in the cell, they would have been calling the local psych ward and saying, "Have you got bed?" And they would be saying,
Yeah,
"No, we can't deal with it. Get rid of her."
yeah,
Yeah, but this backwards and forwards, that always is
yeah,
awful what happens. It's
yeah,
dreadful when this happens. So
yeah,
that's what happened to you. Was
yeah,
that you were stuck in this cell, which is the only safe place for you, without proper medical help, while
yeah,
they fought to a battle again amongst each other for somebody to deal with you, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then eventually I was transported to the psychiatric unit,
Yeah,
still in a state of shock,
yeah, yeah,
bewilderment. I just hadn't
yeah,
got a clue what was going on. And I remember, I think it will have been a psychiatrist or a doctor that had come and assessed me there. And then they told me that I was going to be staying there with them for a while. At this point, I went into fight or flight mode and
yeah.
just ran for the door, but I was wrestled to the ground. And it was from that day that I received that kind of treatment, really, from that moment, just being restrained permanently, medicated. And I
And
was,
my heart goes out to you. It's again to anybody who's listening. There's a number of messages I want to get really clear to you. One is that, and Beck will come on to this later on in her story, that you're better off in that environment than dead
yeah,
because you're alive. And even though it's frightening and traumatizing, we can get you treatment for fear and trauma. We
yeah,
can't get you treatment for dead. It's
yeah,
permanent. That's
yeah,
just the way it is.
yeah,
We don't have the power to resurrect you, so you're better off there than dead. But it also is an indictment of, Mental Health Act based services, which can be really frightening and difficult and traumatic, and particularly the way people have to access them. We would like to think, wouldn't we, that if you're in distress, we have services that are compassionate and understanding and
mm,
uh, kind and helpful. But actually, more often than not, it's similar to the experience that you have, where people go into crisis and the services are so snowed under. Not an excuse, it's just a fact.
yeah,
You end up in these really dreadful situations that you were in, where you
mm,
weren't given help in a police cell for however long you were there. And then
yeah,
by the time you got to the hospital ward, you were so distressed that they felt that the only interventions they had were to restrain you and medicate you.
yeah, yeah. And to have, so when I'd left that room, they basically picked me up by my arms and my legs
Yeah.
and took me along the corridor towards where my bedroom was going to be. And they basically just put me on the floor, sat on top of me, like numerous people, and injected me. And
Yeah.
within minutes, obviously, they gave me that drug. I don't know what it's called, but to calm me down, knock me out, whatever it was. And it's like I was paralyzed then.
Well, it would have
But
been some sort of benzodiazepine,
yeah,
a pain, a PAM medication, central nervous system depressant.
yeah, horrendous. And then I was taken to my bedroom, and I think I probably slept the rest of that night. But yeah, waking up the next day in that little room that was, I can only describe, it was like some kind of cell in a prison.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
horrendous. I couldn't believe my life had ended up for me being in that place.
But it's also, I think there's another aspect to it, which is often isn't discussed, which is that you're there not necessarily having committed any crime, or you haven't gone through due process as such,
Mm.
but people have sort of removed your freedom or
Yeah,
restricted you, probably for your own good, they would argue.
yeah.
Maybe that is the case. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. I'm just going to say that my experience is that for a lot of people, it feels very unfair.
Mm.
And that
And I did,
sensitivity, go
yeah.
on.
Sorry, I did. I think that's how I felt, really, that
Yeah.
I was some kind of criminal and I was being punished.
Yeah.
That's how I felt at that particular time.
Yeah. And it seems like an injustice to a lot of people.
Mm.
And that sense of injustice isn't really dealt with or taken seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So, what was the rest of your first? Because that was your first stay in a psych ward. What was the rest of it like? How long were you there? And
Yeah,
did what did people explain? What did they tell you?
not much, to be honest. I wasn't told a lot. I was kind of, the majority of the time I was there. I was there for 28 days on an
Yeah,
assessment. And yeah, on a daily basis, it was like Groundhog Day. I'd just be given my medication, wander the corridors, do nothing. I wasn't given any activities, no
yeah. There's
therapy
not a
or
lot to do
anything.
on those wards.
No, it was horrendous. And I got it in my head that I needed to get off my medication because I
Right.
felt that confused and I don't know, like a zombie. I thought I need to get my wits about me here and try and get off my medication. So I tried to hide it
Yeah.
and come off it, but staff found out that I'd tried to hide it.
And then that's
Uh,
labeled as non-compliance and you're making things
yeah,
worse and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
and they weren't impressed with me, so they basically dragged me back down the corridor. I wasn't kicking off or being violent in any way, maybe a bit obstructive because I hadn't taken my medication, but they didn't even try any kind of verbal tactics with me. They just went straight into grabbing me, dragging me down the corridor, and literally pinning me down, numerous of them, and shoving the tablets down my throat,
Yeah.
shoving water down my throat like they were waterboarding me.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
trauma of that's taken me a very, very long time, and it's still embedded in my head how they treated me. Really, they treated me like an animal a lot of the time.
And also, it's, for people to understand when you're in that experience, it doesn't feel like somebody's trying to help you. It feels like somebody's trying to kill you.
Yeah, that's how I felt. Yeah, I had it in my head that I would never come out of that hospital alive. Every day I lived in fear of the staff. Then one of the patients found out I was a police officer, didn't like the police, made my time in there hard,
Yeah.
threatened to set my room on fire one night, come into my room with a lighter and some sticks, tried to like scare the living daylights out of me. So yeah, I felt like I had to watch my back from other inpatients and staff really.
Yeah. And it's not unusual for people to report what you're reporting back.
Mm.
That's the
Yeah,
sad thing about this situation, that it's, and it's also very interesting, I think, from my perspective, that a lot of the behavior that we see is situationally specific and is due, like anybody would struggle if a group of people are behaving in a manner which makes them think they're trying to kill me.
yeah,
And if you're confused because you're psychotic and you're confused because you're have cognitive distortions from depression and anxiety, it's very easy to get into that sort of
mm.
mind state that people are attacking me, because they are attacking
Yeah,
me. And
yeah,
that's the truth. And then one's response to being attacked is to fight back often. It might be to freeze, it might be to try and escape, but these are inbuilt responses in us that overwhelm us and take over. And then you get this cycle of escalation.
yeah, definitely.
It
And
sounds
and
like that.
when yeah, and the behaviour from staff just got gradually worse. The odd push and shove if I didn't clean my teeth, stuff like that. And I knew kind of I had to play ball with them. But then
Yeah.
my parents would come and visit once a week. And they wouldn't let the visit go ahead unless I took this little blue tablet, which to this day I don't know what it is, but I'd literally take it and it would erase all my memory, put me into a zombie state for my
Yeah.
visit, and I'd literally not be able to tell my parents anything that was happening in there, which made it all worse as well.
Some sort of antipsychotic by the sounds of it. So you were there 28 days and then discharged, or?
Yeah, they wanted to put me on a section 3, but my parents fought at the case conferences to get me out. So as long as I went back into their care, which I did. So yeah, after the 28 days, I got out, went back to live with my mum and dad, who cared for me and monitored my medication. Um, but that medication just I spiraled again, started getting suicidal thoughts again. Like I said earlier, I was probably worse, 10 times worse than when I went in, because I now
Yeah.
had the added trauma of what I went
Right.
through in that unit.
Yeah.
Started to have like I said, suicidal thoughts again, started to act them out. And I knew at this point, although I'd gone through all that trauma in that unit, and some people have questioned this and said to me, well, if you've gone through all that trauma, why did you put yourself voluntarily back in another place? And it's hard to explain, but I was in control of it this time. I wasn't being arrested. I wasn't going to be on a section. I was going back in voluntarily, which I did at a unit closer to where my mum and dad lived, who could come
Yeah.
and visit whenever they wanted. And I only went back in for a week, and I purely did it to because I had specifically said I wanted to kind of wean myself off the medication because I knew ultimately that's how I would have started to get better.
Yeah.
And they controlled it in there, and thankfully, it did work. Don't get me wrong. I didn't go in there for a week and I was completely better when I came out. I still had a long road and a long battle ahead of me.
Yeah.
But when I came out, each day, each week, I had setbacks, but I gradually started to see my friends again, the odd one, started to try and get my odd run back in, which I'd done every day prior to being ill. And I decided that I wanted to bite the bullet and go to work for a case conference to maybe see if I could eventually get my job back in the police. And we're talking 18 months down the line now from when I was first sectioned. And work were amazing, to be honest. There was a particular boss that really fought to keep me in the job, and they were amazing with me. And I asked to go to a different area, different division. And it was small steps, reduced hours, different duties, but I built my confidence back up and I managed to get back in uniform, which is
It's
remarkable,
extraordinary.
really.
I'm really touched
Yeah,
by your story. It's
yeah,
incredible.
thank you.
It makes absolute sense to me that because you reframed your experience of going back into a hospital, it was very different.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
were
the staff,
empowered. You were
yeah, and
empowered.
the staff were a lot better, to be fair. They were
Yeah.
more compassionate, they were more understanding, they had more time for you. It was a completely different setting. Whether that was because it was voluntarily and not under a section, I don't know. I don't know.
It's difficult to say. I mean, my experience is this, and again, let's talk about first responders. You know, if you think of an acute psychiatric ward as like a first response situation, somebody's dealing with frightening and difficult stuff that you really shouldn't have to deal with. Like,
Yeah,
what, you know, nobody should really have to deal with horrific murders. Nobody should really have to deal with horrific suicides, domestic abuse situations, kids being abused, etc. That's what you had to deal with for your job.
yeah,
But it takes the toll. And I think being in an acute admission psych ward in an area of the UK where there's a lot of admissions, that takes its toll. And again, because it's a helping profession, I think people go into denial about the damage it's doing to them. And
yeah.
that damage comes out in their own behaviour towards patients. I think that's the
You
truth.
think? Yeah,
That's my experience, to be honest. And there are some units are better at helping people process that experience, staff process that experience, and not become overreactive.
yeah, yeah,
Because the cycles of abuse happen and people become brutalized by their experiences. You've seen in the police, you've seen fellow officers, you don't need to name them, I wouldn't ask you to, who have become hardened and
yeah,
brutalized by their experience,
yeah,
and nothing reaches them anymore.
yeah,
And that's a
yeah. That's
classic,
true.
again, that's a very classic trauma response that people
Mm,
shut down because they can't allow themselves to feel anymore, or people are overreactive. You know, you've seen colleagues who, at the their startle response is off the scale, so they see
yeah.
one little thing, it triggers them, and they're 1,000,000% into something, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've dealt with all those different people. Yeah,
Same on a
I've worked
psych
with them.
ward. It's what happens.
Yeah,
I've seen it loads, and it's a really it's not talked about enough. We don't provide enough support to people, and people don't, then these cycles of abuse. So I'm glad you found a good unit because they do exist.
yeah,
And yes, it does sound like because you'd reframe the experience because you're like, well, I do have a problem. I do need help. This isn't ideal, but it's the help that's on offer.
yeah, yeah. And just going back to what you said about people not talking, I think a lot of people don't talk about the abuse that goes on in wars because people
Oh,
don't think
that's right.
they're going to be believed because
Yeah.
people think you're in there because I don't know, you've had this breakdown and who's going to believe you when you're full of medication. And I think I felt like that up until recently, really. And that's why I've kind of opened up about my story with a view to speaking out for those that
Yeah.
don't speak out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently still working with somebody who was sectioned against their will many times as a child, had the worst trauma I've ever seen, and I've been supporting them alongside the trust that did it to them, because they
Right.
had to go
Okay.
back to them for help, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And it's been over a decade of work with that person,
Wow.
so absolutely. And I think we do need to talk about it, Beck.
Yeah.
We
No,
really
I
do,
agree.
because people are in a rock and a hard place. Because I would never say to somebody, like I said earlier, you're better alive than dead.
Yeah.
And if that's what we've got to save your life, that's what you need to do to save your life. That's fine.
Yeah.
We'll treat the trauma later, but you'll be alive. And we were saying before the show, Northern Ireland has now, and although Stormont hasn't met since, but Northern Ireland has new legislation around mental health, which isn't the Mental Health Act. They've got rid of the Mental Health Act, which is a real problem, I think. The
Mm.
Mental Health Act is
Yeah, it
it's too
is.
much power.
Yeah.
It's too much power. We need something else. And we're all sort of waiting for Stormont to get its act together to sit again. Stormont, for people who don't know, is Northern Ireland's parliament. So they haven't enacted this legislation. They haven't put it into practice yet. But it's new legislation based upon mental capacity rather than Mental Health Act.
Mm.
Mental capacity is a much more subtle assessment.
Yeah.
It doesn't assume that just because you're ill, you have no rights, or that you aren't capable of making lots of decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
that
not
needs
bad
to
for
come
you.
in that. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. All your rights and all your decisions, everything's stripped of you in an
yeah,
instance.
yeah.
You feel powerless.
And I think that's what people respond to is that, as opposed to necessarily their mental illness. They're,
Yeah.
they're quite reasonably responding to a system that is just overpowering. It's medieval,
Mm.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it
But you
is.
did make that choice. You had a plan. And the major part of your recovery seems to have been like this self-empowerment. You had a goal, which was to get back into work, which you achieved,
Yeah.
but also your health, your physical health, which were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell
So
me about
yeah,
that.
I've always loved keeping fit. I've always run a lot, and that's always been my stress relief, regardless prior to this breakdown. Um, but especially now, yeah, it's my kind of medicine as such. I run every single day, even if like at least 3 miles every day, and
Brilliant.
it's how I cope with stress because I
Yeah.
still, although I'm better and I'm not on any medication now, I still suffer from anxiety now and again. My panic attacks, especially since I've kind of opened up about my story, have reared the head. Not a lot, but the odd one. But I find if I put my trainers on, go for a run, work it out, I feel so much better after it. Yeah.
And you moved out of the police eventually, didn't you? You sort of
I did,
medical
yeah.
retirement.
Yeah, I went out on, it'll be 3 years this year on ill health, reasons unconnected to this. I was badly assaulted at a 999 call and sustained an injury, so I couldn't be frontline anymore. So I didn't want to be stuck behind a desk for the
Yeah.
last 10 years because I'd always been operational.
Yeah.
So yeah, they really looked after me, the police, to be fair. So they pensioned me
Good.
off.
As they should do. As
Yeah,
they bloody well should do. The amount of
yeah,
work you've got to do. It's quite right too. So
yeah,
you got your pension. But again, it sounds like you were making decisions there. You were given options and making decisions. So rather than having things imposed upon you,
yeah,
here's your options. Which one do you want? Well, I'll go for this one. And so you could embrace it, even though it's not ideal. It
yeah.
does give you a sense of power, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I'd fought so hard to get back into the police. It's not how I wanted to go out. I wanted to ultimately do my 30 years, but I had kids at this point, so I reassessed life, and yeah, everything's turned out for the best now.
Good. And you moved into what, victim support, you said?
Yeah, I've worked for victim support since April, so
Right.
dealing with victims of crime, which again is ideal for me because I was a family liaison officer, my last role in the police.
Really hard work.
Yeah. So, and I love that
Why
kind of
wouldn't
work.
do that? Seriously.
Yeah. It's interesting work.
Yes, well, interesting is the word for it.
Yeah. Yeah, but
That's
victim
no, it's a
support
really
being
tough stuff. Yeah, really tough stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's like what you're saying is a natural segue into the victim support
yeah.
and sort of dealing with that. So that's extraordinary. And then you've written a book now about it all.
I have, yeah. So when I went out on ill health, I had counselling. You're given the option of having a few counselling sessions prior when you leave. And I got in touch with this counsellor, Zoe, and I told her all about my story. But rather than about talking about jobs in the police, I opened up to her about all this that happened 16
Yeah.
years ago about the section. And at the end of my session, she said, "You should write a book."
Brilliant.
Kind of tongue in cheek about it. You should write a book. It's a remarkable that you've gone through all that and gone back to being a cop. And the day after, I literally started writing it, and it took me a year and a half to do my book, which was very hard reliving it all,
Yeah.
but at the same time cathartic for me because
Yeah.
I remembered a lot more than I thought I would, and it was good just to get it down on paper.
Yeah, it stops it being inside your head so much, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
look at it and show it to other people. Did you? What was your family reaction when they read about this stuff? I mean, they saw a bit of it, but they wouldn't have known the full extent of it.
No, my mum found it hard to read, but
Yeah.
like she said, she lived it. So she said it couldn't make her feel any worse than what she went through, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
my friends, I'd kept this very, very close to myself and very quiet. So people I'd worked with for 15 years knew absolutely nothing about this, didn't know I was sectioned, didn't know I'd gone through this. So for them to have read my book, I think it was hard for a lot of my friends to read it as well. But for the first time since I've published it, I don't feel that shame as much
Yeah.
anymore because
Great.
the response I've had from it. I mean, I've had police from all over the country that I don't know contact me. Yeah, just saying I've read your book. It's given me the push to go and get counselling.
Good. Good.
Yeah, that's all I ever wanted my book to do. I just
You're saving
wanted to get
lives,
them.
mate.
Yeah, yeah,
You
and
definitely
it's
are. You definitely are.
thanks. And it means a lot to me,
Saving
that because that's all I wanted to do was just to get the message out there that this kind of stuff can happen to anyone. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but ultimately there is recovery. You can recover from
lives.
something. I mean, if I can and gone through all that, then yeah.
Yeah. Wow, it's brilliant. What's the book called?
It's called Police to Paranoia by Rebecca J.House.
Right. And how do people get hold of it? Can they get it on?
On Yeah, on Amazon. Yeah, it's on Amazon. And
Right.
I've got a website as well, Rebecca Jane House author. If you put that on Google, you can get my book on there as well, which just details everything I've done so far with the book. And
So Rebecca Jane House, author.
Rebecca, yeah,
Right, we'll put a link to it so people can see it.
thank you.
And you go around doing talks and stuff like that as well, Beck.
Yeah, I've done a couple already, just in like around the local community where I am, but I've been requested by different police forces
Very
now.
good.
Yeah, around the country I've not done any as yet, but I've got a few in the pipeline. And I'm
Right.
also in the process of setting up my own local mental health support groups within my area. So I've just managed to secure a couple of venues for that, which are going to start in January.
Right. Well, look, I mean, we're obviously coming to the end of the show, as you know, but once you've got that up and running, will you come back
Yeah.
and tell us about that? And
Of course I will.
maybe even invite some people who are in the group to come along and have a chat about it, because the reality is this, that when people are empowered to start finding solutions and then they share the solutions with other people, like we call it peer support, that's when things really change.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I want to do. And I just want to give people an opportunity to come along and have a chat. And
brilliant. And if people want to get hold of you, they can get hold of you through your website. Is that right?
Yeah. If you just put Rebecca J.House author, Jane House author on Google, it'll bring up my website.
My nose is dripping because I want to cry because I'm so touched by your story. It's amazing.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. It's a wonderful story. It is.
Thank you.
It's terrific.
Yeah.
But it is a true story of transformation into something. And I've always been fascinated by people who can transform experience. I want to write something about it.
Yeah.
Such an interesting experience. I'm thinking about a mate of mine who she had two twin boys. Both of them got into heroin addiction. One of them didn't make it, and one of them did. And she set up a support group from that.
Amazing.
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's enough just to survive it, but let alone then go out and help other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's incredible. And you're one of those people going out, you're not just survived this, but you've come through, you've transformed it, you're going to help other people. So
yeah,
that's extraordinary. Listen, we do have to finish there. And I'm also aware that you've got to pick up your kids from school and stuff like that. You've got to be a good mum, otherwise you might have the police around again.
Yeah, don't want
No, not anymore.
that. Yeah.
Becky, it's been brilliant. You stay there. It's been
Yeah.
brilliant to have you on. Thank you so much. Everybody go out and read this book. Inspiring, absolutely inspiring stuff. Hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you for the next one. But I'm going to say goodbye for now.